But what I wonder is, how do we discern between a almost panic response, whether it be a temporary anxiety response, and something that is a little bit more entrenched to the point that we would call it a disorder?
Okay, well, there'll be some mechanisms that overlap, but just say, as we talked about last time with depersonalization in panic attacks, there are probably a few things going on. One is the person's somewhat, agitated, that goes with the other panic symptoms, and also very vigilant about their body and how they're reacting. But with the agitation and distress, then what can happen is part of our frontal lobe can be activated that's trying to inhibit our emotional reaction. So it inhibits the limbic system, so the fight and flight response. And by dampening that, that probably helps us respond better in a number of situations, dampening that distress. So what's happening is there's this numbing that's coming in. So people have, with panic attacks, the agitation and the numbing and being very vigilant about their body, including noticing the feeling weird, noticing how their body doesn't seem to belong to them, for example. It's very uncomfortable. Now, that can be a reaction during a panic attack, but what if this becomes a more regular kind of pattern, almost like a more regular habit, where the person is getting into a habit of looking to dampen their emotions in some ways? For example, being on autopilot. That's when it can become a more general thing, and we'll also talk about it later on, how people probably can also use some kind of hypnotic mechanisms to look to dampen pain. We'll talk about some of that, but there's a numbing response that comes from part of the frontal lobes trying to inhibit the reaction of the limbic system, the emotional reaction. So that's where people will tend to have less limbic system activity, that fight and flight brain activity, in emotional situations, because they're numbing it. And people often have a combination of sometimes being triggered and very agitated, and acting very agitated, and other times acting quite numb. And that can sometimes look bipolar when it's actually this other mechanism happening. So the general gist of it is it becomes more entrenched, more persistent, more frequent. People overuse that kind of strategy.